Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you all. I've been told to kick off on time at 2 o'clock, and I have been told that as well as that, if I start, people will just drift in as the talk continues. My experience normally is that people leave as the talk continues, but let's just hope that that's not the case this time. The topic we're going to cover over the next half hour is the one that you see on the screen. We're going to explore the first 10,000 days of the World Wide Web, and we're going to ask the question, does that give us any clues about what the next 10,000 days of the World Wide Web might be like? And that's what I'm going to cover. Just to let you know who I am, my name is Gareth Dunlop. I've made my living in the world of digital and in the world of design for all of those 10,000 days. For a quarter of a century now, I've been making my living from design. At the minute, I run a dedicated UX agency called Fathom, and I'm also Chief Digital Officer at a larger agency called Lo and Behold. For those of you who tweet, please do tweet me. I'm at Dunlop71. In particular, if you see me pointing dramatically at a slide which looks quite nice, please do take that tweetable moment and get it up on Twitter. I just want to prove to the people back at the office that I'm actually coming and doing a day's work. I haven't just cleared off. I said that a couple of years ago. I said, please take a photo as I tweet. I want to prove to people that I'm actually doing a day's work. And here's what one of the people in the group tweeted. Great game of golf with Dunlop71. Nice to get out on a jolly for the day. So if you want to just put me in the soup, that's okay. If you want to tweet something nice, that's okay as well. So what have we got lined up for the next half hour? Well, here's what I'd like to cover. I'd like to kind of set the scene, do a little bit of an introduction. And then I want to think about the evolution of the internet, and specifically the evolution of the web over those 10,000 days. I want to look at the 4 distinct phases in the maturing of the web, and really I want to ask the question, so what? Where does this leave us? Is there something that we can learn from the 4 phases of the internet that gives us a clue about what's going to win in the 10,000 days that are coming? So we're going to look back over the last 10,000 and ask, what does that mean for the 10,000 to come? So what's this 10,000 days thing all about? Well, let me answer with a little bit of mathematics. 10,000 days in years is 10,000 divided by 365.25. That's just over 27 years. If we subtract 27 years from the current date, then we're back to the 12th of May, 1993. So the web is just warming up between 1989 and 1984. I'm going to call that phase Web Not Point Naught. The internet or the web pre-commercialization, before getting into the commercial world, we're going to refer to as Web Not Point Naught. But before we get there, I want to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to play the role of granddad in Only Fools and Horses. I'm going to tell you a few during the war stories. Because I suppose I personally have been fortunate to see the highs and lows of Web Not Point Naught, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and so on. Because I suppose I've made my living from the coalface. I was involved in the project team that delivered Ireland's first online personal banking project in 1997. I joined a web agency in 97. I'd planned to stay 6 months. I ended up staying 13 years. The business grew from 4 to 55 people. I learned a bit there as well. I was involved in digital strategy for a year, and 10 years ago I set up a dedicated UX agency called Fathom, which we sold to Lo and Behold in May this year. And the thing which interests me is, are there design lessons or are there things that we can learn across that period that get us beyond the trends, that get us beyond what happens to be cool or in at a certain period of time? Can we break beyond what is trendy in a moment in time and discern some more universal principles from what is trendy? Now, it's a pretty difficult challenge, but when we think of other design disciplines, if we think of the design discipline of architecture, architecture is very good at this. So if you speak to someone who knows architecture well, they will be able to look at a building, and just from looking at that building, they will be able to identify the period that that building comes from. And the reason that they can do that is because different eras in architecture history have different styles. So you can look at something and you can identify it as Byzantine or Art Nouveau or Renaissance. You can identify the period of the design from the look of the design. In other words, architectural trends come and go, just as web design trends come and go. But if you speak to an architect who knows what they're talking about, they are absolutely crystal clear on universal principles of architecture which don't come and go with trends, which sit above trends, which supersede trends. So for instance, if you speak to any architect, they will talk to you, or they will consider in their design the relationship that the building has with light. Because a fundamental principle of architecture is the building's relationship with light. You speak to any architect who knows what they're talking about, and they will talk about what they call desire lines. And desire lines are the things that most people do when they're in that building. So desire lines in a family home are from the back door to the kitchen to the living room. Desire lines in a department store are to the left of the front desk. Desire lines in a hotel are different. So architects understand the importance of understanding desire lines. Architects also understand the importance of the relationship that the building has with its natural environment. So even though architectural trends come and go, architects understand that there are these universal principles of design success which they won't compromise on. And that's really the question that I'm asking, but in a web context. In a digital context, I'm asking, are there principles which supersede design trends which help us understand or help us do digital design really well, which sets us up for the next 10,000 days? I don't have time today to go through an in-depth view of the evolution of the most popular websites that we would be familiar with. But a look at one website I hope will be instructive. It's one of the busiest websites in the UK, and it's one of the longest standing websites in the UK, and that is the BBC website. And as we look at the evolution of the BBC website from its first launch around 1998 to the present day, we can see very clear differences in design patterns. As we have a look, we can see that the design is evolving. We can see that it moves into 3 columns. We can see that the headings are tending to move towards the top. We can see that it's getting more simple. It's relying more on content. And if we fast forward beyond 2010 into the most recent decade, we see that these trends are even more pronounced. The homepage has got even longer. There's more of reliance on photography. Even more of the fuss has been stripped out. There's been a focus on an unfussiness and a readability to the website. And now you can see that the website is probably 10 or 12 screen depths deep. So when we look at this and many other websites over the period of the last 10,000 years, we see that there are clear trends that supersede what's cool at a moment in time and which point to really immutable design principles. So let's go back to the start. Back in 1989, this very clever gentleman here, Tim Berners-Lee, was working on a research project at CERN, and he invented the World Wide Web. And you can see here in the late 80s, early 1990s, he's sitting proudly beside one of the first web browsers. In fact, this screen here is a screenshot of one of the very first web browsing sessions that the world has ever seen. Perhaps we didn't know back then just how important this would be, but this has set the tone for everything that has followed. But the early days of web Not Point Naught, were not plain sailing. People tended to fall into one of 2 camps. Either wild hyperbole about what the web was going to bring to the world, or too much skepticism, too much criticism, even from really well-informed sources. So back in 1990 or 1988, you've got this guy, Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, saying, by 2005, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. Boy, did he get that one wrong. But he wasn't alone in getting it wrong. Even organizations like Newsweek were publishing things like this: the internet, why cyberspace isn't and will never be nirvana. We've got this: we're promised instant catalog shopping. Just point and click for great deals. We'll order airline tickets over the network, make restaurant reservations, and it finishes with the conclusion that it simply won't work. So the web pre-commercialization in 1994 had a really rocky start, and it was full of people who were skeptical and thought that the hyperbole simply wasn't real. Anyway, come around 1994, Web 1.0 came along and we were up and running. And the difficulty with Web 1.0 is that many of the designs were terrible. They were just unacceptably poor. And I can say that as someone who was responsible for some of them. So we were finding our feet. We didn't fully understand what web design was. We were copying print design. We were making all sorts of mistakes along the way. And slowly but surely, we were trying to stumble across how this new world of design worked. If I was to summarize the single biggest mistake that was made in the early days of web design, of Web 1.0, it was that web designers used the wrong frame of reference when they were designing. They used as their frame of reference print design. They used as their frame of reference above-the-line, offline design principles. And they mistook a key point about World Wide Web design, which is that offline design is typically focused on getting attention. Interactive or web design is focused on giving attention. So the dynamics that you use to get someone's attention are completely different to the ones that you use when you want to give someone your attention. When they are on your website, you already have their attention. There's no need to try and get it again. So they used the wrong frame of reference. So because of that, we saw some stuff that, looking through a 2021 lens, just looks wildly indulgent. For those of you who weren't around, you may not even believe this to be true, but there used to be a thing called the flash intro. And I'm almost embarrassed to admit that it was once a thing. I see some of you may have designed one or two. I'm in that camp as well. But the flash intro was, if someone wanted to go to a website, rather than showing them the website, you would show them a 15 or 30-second animation before they got to the website. And this animation just stopped the user getting to the content that they came for in the first place. Luckily for those of us who were users at the time, the invention of the flash intro also came with the invention of a really important button called skip intro. And not only did flash intros become popular, but the skip intro button became the most popular button on the internet as people quickly wanted to get past the thing that they didn't come to see to get to the thing that they did come to see. And some of these flash intros were spectacularly terrible. Here's a particularly terrible one from around 2003. This is from the Firetrap website, the fashion brand. First of all, when you come onto the site, if you didn't have the very latest of everything plugged into your browser, you got this font size 4 message with blue text on black background saying that you're not allowed to visit the site. So straight away, most people weren't even allowed to get into the site. For those who could get into the site, the flash intro involved this little dial getting filled up with no hint of irony with some form of yellow liquid. I'll let you guess what that may have been. Eventually, when that filled up, we got this website, again with no sense of irony, which says, "Vanity to the manner born." So this is what happens when design loses its frame of reference. This is what happens when we lose sight of the purpose which underpins design. We get just monstrous stuff like this. But intros weren't just flash back in the day. Intros were also just regular web pages. It seemed that in those early days of design, designers would do anything other than give the user the content and the functionality that they came to find in the first place. I remember one time in the early 2000s, I was driving home from Dublin, and I was speeding, and I got pulled in, and I was given a ticket, which was completely fair. I deserved the ticket. So I drove home. I realized I had this ticket to pay, but I wasn't sure how to pay it because I lived in the north and the ticket was from the south, and did I post it? How did I pay the ticket? So I went onto the Garda website in order to find out how I paid my parking ticket, and I arrived in the site to see this page here. So the page said, "Welcome to Ireland's National Police Service." It says, "Are you a new visitor or a previous visitor?" So I'm thinking to myself, maybe this is a trick question. Maybe these guys are wanting to find out, do I always speed, or was I just in a particular hurry on that day? So I may be from the country, but I'm not so foolish. I clearly clicked new visitor. So when I clicked new visitor, I get a welcome from the Chief Constable himself. "Noel, am I glad to see you? You're not going to believe this. I was in a hurry home and I was going a little bit too fast." So Noel's only too delighted to welcome me to the site. I eventually enter the site and I find how to get my ticket. So in those early days of the web, we used the wrong frame of reference to understand how we could communicate. But it was also a time of remarkable opportunity. It was a time where there was a real explosion in invention, a real explosion in new ideas, and an explosion in recognizing that the web had changed things, and there was opportunity to go after. So there really was, in the late 90s, an excited gold rush, where organizations recognized that the wagons were heading west, that the internet had changed things, and they wanted to be on those wagons. And as so often happens when an explosion of invention happens, we see wild variance in how people go about responding to the opportunity. We see people who plant the seeds that get it right for the long term, and we see people who just get it wrong and they go off just in the wrong direction, or they indulge in the wrong excesses and take the invention in different directions. Let me contrast the approach taken by some organizations that didn't make it and some organizations which did make it and are still making it today. Those of you of a certain age may remember a fashion website called boo.com. Boo.com was a little bit like the Firetrap website. You needed the latest version of Flash to run it. It was incredibly inaccessible. It was impossible to find the clothes that you wanted because it was so difficult to navigate the site. And unsurprisingly, Boo.com burned their way through somewhere around $50 million in a year and a half, never to be seen again. And they were the poster child for the worst indulgences of Web 1.0. But in amongst the wild indulgences of Web 1.0, there were some organizations who were quietly, slowly going about their business of asking the question, is there a new frame of reference that we can use? Is there a new way we can think about design that allows us to get beyond some of the worst of the design that we see in Web 1.0? And unsurprisingly, Amazon and Google, who all these years later are still at the forefront, they were the early pioneers of thinking about this stuff. I think we can all agree that both have improved their logos beyond recognition, but these are the early stage logos. So let's have a look at Amazon, just to illustrate how they thought about design, because I think there are some clues in here which set us up for what the next 10,000 years might look like. Amazon employed the services of these two guys here, the Eisenberg brothers. The Eisenberg brothers were some of the early internet analysts back in the late 1990s who wrote some of the important early seminal books. They were employed by Amazon to help Amazon with a problem which they described as shopping trolley abandonment. Now, the reason that shopping trolley abandonment was such an issue, particularly in the late 90s, is because online retailers, they couldn't understand it. And the reason that they couldn't understand it is because there was no real-world equivalent. So users were coming onto websites, they were filling up their baskets, they were pressing checkout, but they weren't going on to buy the goods in their baskets. And retailers over the decades had many problems, but they never had a problem where customers were going into a store and putting clothes into a basket, selling the basket on the floor, and walking out of the store. So they were confused as to why this would happen. So they commissioned the Eisenberg brothers to ask the question, why is Amazon struggling from so much shopping trolley abandonment? So the Eisenberg brothers went about deconstructing the problem. They asked themselves this: if the user's problem that they want solved is to buy a product, and in Amazon's case back then it was to buy a book, if the overall problem is to buy a book, how can we deconstruct that problem? What are the sub-problems that make up that major problem? So what the Eisenberg brothers did was they outlined the 6 different problems that Amazon needed to solve for their customers. So problem number 1, users needed to move towards the books that they were interested in. Problem number 2, when they'd found the subset of books that they may be interested in, they wanted to select the ones that they were most interested in. Problem number 3, if they're thinking about which book or which CD to buy, they want to compare their options. As we move to number 4, they're going to decide because they're about to commit to buying something. Problem number 5 is easy checkout. Problem number 6 is fulfillment. So all of a sudden, we've got a much better frame of reference for understanding what design is than simply taking a print brochure and trying to make it look pretty on a computer. But what the Eisenberg brothers found out was this: 60% of the reasons that people abandoned checkout was to do with the experience before checkout. So this is a seminal mic drop breakthrough moment in the world of e-commerce design, because it tells Amazon where to focus their user experience efforts in terms of trying to improve conversion. 20% of shopping trolley abandonment was to do with the shopping trolley, and 20% was to do with fulfillment. And those of you who are involved in conversion projects or in e-commerce projects to this day will know that we typically don't use the phrase shopping trolley abandonment. We generally use phrases like conversion rate or conversion rate optimization. But this begins to give us some of the first clues of some of the little seeds that were planted in Web 1.0, which are going to get us through the next 10,000 days. So it was a time of crazy excess, of some very bad ideas, but the germs, the chrysalis, the start of some really good ideas. So Web 1.0 came and went, and around 2004, Web 2.0 came along. Now, Web 2.0 isn't a real thing. No one invented Web 2.0 in the same way that Tim Berners-Lee invented Web 1.0. Web 2.0 is just an expression, a collective descriptive term to reflect how the web evolved from 2004 to the present day. And the major theme of Web 2.0 is that the web became decentralized. It stopped being controlled by media houses and by large corporate powerful organizations, and it started being controlled by you and I. It started being controlled by the people. So Web 2.0 was about turning the web from a read-only medium into a read-write medium, where all of us contributed to the internet. So we used to get our encyclopedia information from Britannica, which was produced by Britannica. Now we get it from Wikipedia, which is produced by us all. We used to read our news or our opinion pieces on personal homepages. Now we read them on blogs, which is produced by us all. We used to get information from other sites through screen scraping. Now they provide it to us via web services, and so on and so on. So Web 2.0 was a time of tremendous democratization of the internet, where organizations released power to those who could contribute to the discussion online. And so what happened in Web 2.0 is that these logos and these brands are all from the early days of Web 2.0, is that there was an influx of leaderless organizations onto the internet. Now, by leaderless, what I mean is we've got organizations whose value doesn't lie in their technology and doesn't lie in their leadership team. Their value lies in the community that they have with them. Now, that doesn't mean that their technology isn't smart or that their leaders aren't strong. It just means that if you got an identical management team, an identical technology, and tried to compete with Flickr, Flickr would win because they have all the people. And Bebo used to have all the people. And YouTube has all the people, and so on. So there was this groundswell of organizations for whom the value of the organization lay in their ability to democratize what happened in their platform. This was nothing new. The Apache Indians had been leaderless for centuries. Alcoholics Anonymous is the world's largest leaderless community organization. These were simply being mimicked onto Web 2.0. And in an age of misinformation and in an age of cyberbullying, and in 2021 when we've grown cynical to social media, it's very easy to forget that this was a time of great optimism. This was a time where we really thought that the evolution of the web would bring better democracy, it would bring better social engagement, it would bring better online conversation. Obviously, as we know, it tended to push us apart rather than brought us together, but it was a time of great optimism. As well as that, it was a time when the smartphone revolution came along and responsive design revolution came along as well. Fast forwarding then to Web 3.0, and we're in Web 3.0 at the moment. It's emerging. Web 3.0, I've called it the quest for meaning. Some people call it the semantic web. What Web 3.0 is about is using context and using meaning to give people richer experiences. Let me give you a couple of very quick examples. If you go onto Google and you search for the best hotel, the best restaurant, the best city, you're not looking for a hotel which is the word best in its title. You're looking for the actual meaning of the word best. So if we have a look at how the web has evolved, it is trying hard to use the contextual clues that we leave on our browsers to give us the answer to the best hotel. So if we're searching for the best hotel midweek, Google might assume that we're traveling by ourselves for work, and it might give us different answers than if we're looking for the best hotel for the weekend, where perhaps we're going away with our significant other. It may give us a different result. So the semantic web is trying to bring context to give us the premium information that we can based on words like best. It wants to interpret the word rather than slavishly just copy the word. So what that means is, if for instance you go on to Google and you search for bare naked ladies, you better be hopeful that your cookies are telling Google that you're looking for the band rather than looking for something else. So Web 3.0 is all about meaning. In Web 3.0, you can ask Google something like this: that movie where those two guys drink wine, and Google will send you to the movie where those two guys drink wine. It's this search for meaning based on context. I think my favorite example, I'll just show it to you now. Another nice example is this. If you ask Google, what is the time in New York? It will tell you the time in New York. And if you say, what about San Francisco? It will also give you the time in San Francisco. In other words, this question without context doesn't mean anything. What about San Francisco? What about it? But because of the context of this question, Google knows how to answer that question. So the big trend in Web 3.0 is the pursuit of meaning, and meaning driven by context, environmental factors, and previous behavior. So we've thought about Web, Not Point Naught, and 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I suppose where I'd love to go with this is I want to ask the question, just as in architecture, there are principles that are immutable to trends, which sit above trends. The questions and hopefully the answers I'd love to leave you with are, what are our equivalents? In the midst of all the change that has come and gone in the last 10,000 days, what are the rock solid foundations which haven't changed and which give us clues to the next 10,000 days? Let me share with you how the digital winners think about design. The first thing that they have recognized is that users are much more interested in utility than you think. Users are much more time-starved, they are much less patient, they are much more action-driven than you think they are when you're sitting in the boardroom beside a whiteboard with a cappuccino. They are driven by utility and they are driven by value. Their emotional contract they write is, I will give you my time if you don't, I will give you my attention if you don't waste my time. The second thing which the digital winners recognize is just how powerful users are. They realize how easy it is to access a competitor, how quickly they can go to a different website or close the browser or do something else. They recognize how if your marketing material says one thing, but the truth is another, users can find the truth by going and searching somewhere else. They're not in control of the message. And the final thing which the winners recognize is user priorities. They understand what matters to users and they invest project time accordingly. Let me finish with just a couple of conclusions. The digital winners, principle number one, they pursue nuance. They avoid easy cliches. Now, I love the work of guys like Luke W. and other kind of celebrity UX and design professionals. I think they bring a lot to the party. But one of the difficulties about following these guys is that difficult and nuanced truths which they explore are sometimes just generalized beyond recognition. So we get phrases like mobile first. We get phrases like users don't read, or users don't scroll, or blogs help SEO. And there's truth in all of those things, but they're not the fullness of truth. There's nuance. User first is a much better approach to design than mobile first. Users do read, just not as we expect them, and just not the same way they read books. So the digital winners pursue nuance. The second thing is that they really care about users. They are prepared to make difficult decisions on behalf of their users. And what that means is that sometimes design isn't as pretty as you might like it to be. Now, I find myself discussing the design of Amazon regularly with people. And while today's not the day to get into that, for me the overriding perspective when I look at Amazon is simply this. If Amazon could sell more stuff to more people by looking prettier, you can be pretty sure that it would look prettier. So I am concluding that the utilitarian nature of its design is based on data, and it is based on their commercial imperative to sell as much as they can to as many people as they possibly can. So they properly understand and care about what users care about, and as a result of that are making design decisions accordingly. Number three, design winners invest in navigation and flow. Navigation and flow are by a distance the most underinvested design activities on the internet. I'm fortunate to deliver training, certainly pre-COVID, all over Europe, in about 15 countries over Europe, and I've asked over 1,000 people. When I start the training, I always ask, have you been on a website lately that has made you feel angry? And some people put their hands up, and I ask them, well, what were you trying to do and why were you made to feel angry? People always say, I wasn't able to find the content, I wasn't able to complete the task, I couldn't download the PDF, I couldn't find the time to the train. No one ever says, I didn't like the front page image, or they got the RGB references on the logos a little bit wrong. Now, I'm not saying that you should be careless about front page imagery, or that you shouldn't get your logos right. You should. But we've got to invest in things that align with how we make our users feel, which in the case of Amazon and Google and all these guys is a rock solid information architecture and really clear flow. Number 4, digital winners embed usability at the heart of all their processes. Let me briefly tell you about the largest usability test ever carried out in humankind. 3 years ago, commissioned by the OECD, they wanted to find out what is the degree of adult human literacy in the developed world. They spoke to 216,000 users in 33 countries, and here's what they found out in terms of digital and IT literacy. Graded 1 to 4, where 1 is novice and 4 is expert, 14% of people were level 1. 29 were level 2, quite good. 26 were level 3, very good. 5% were level 4, exceptional. There were some who were IT illiterate. Now here's the problem for those of us involved in digital design. Our problem is this: we are here in the 5%. Most of my colleagues are in the 5%. Most of yours are in the 5%. We go to awards dues, we go to design conferences, we go to technology conferences. We spend all of our time here. It's easy to forget that we are familiar and fluent with things that 95% of users aren't. And so good digital winners get outside the 5% and they design for all. And the final thing is that digital winners invest in deconstructing and understanding problems. They recognize that a problem well articulated is a problem half solved. Einstein said it like this: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. There's something very powerful, not just about solving or searching for solutions, but searching for the deconstructed problem. Because when we get the deconstructed problem, it gives us the frame of reference that allows us to do good design. So let me finish just with a call to arms, if you like. One of the things that always strikes me from making a living in digital design is that we are constantly just building on the foundation of the work that has gone before. We've been through 10,000 days. We've seen others make mistakes and do things right. We've seen others innovate with a clear sense of what works in terms of success. And I think the call to arms, or the thing I would encourage you to finish up with, is let's stand on the shoulders of the giants who have gone before, who've spent their own money learning the hard way, the right way, who've left us with these clear principles which I think get beyond the trends, which help us do effective digital design and hopefully set us up for the next 10,000 days. Thank you.